How's it going, everybody? My name's Cam White, and welcome back to your favorite weekly horoscope for December 14th through December 20th of 2020. Wasn't here last week. What we're going to do in this horoscope is we're going to kind of go a little bit over what happened last week, and then we're going to cover, of course, this week. And then I kind of want to close out this video kind of just talking about 2020 in itself, because this is kind of it. I mean, like, don't get me wrong, we still have another kind of crazy week ahead of us until we actually get into 2021. But we're really closing things up and actually wrapping up 2020 now. And it's kind of going out with a bang. Yeah, I wasn't here last week. There wasn't a lot going on last week. The only thing I really wanted to hit on about last week was, I mean, we've had Mercury, we had the Sun conjoining the South Node while making the trine to Mars. And when we talk about for one, the Sun conjoining the South Node, there was this sort of like ease of release last week, like this acceptance, this surrendering is what I like to call it too. Of kind of like where things are going, where your views are being shaped. And it kind of depends, of course, on what house it's all in for you. However, with that Sun of the South Node, there was this surrendering, right? And Mars was trining the South Node and the Sun at this time. And when we talk about the trine to the Sun in Mars' synod, the trine to the Sun after a retrograde was when Mars is finally starting to move forward. The Sun, bringing illumination to things, bringing, kind of like light to things. Trining Mars this is kind of giving Mars the okay to go. Now that Mars is, it's in Aries, it's direct, it's starting to move forward again. It's still working through its shadow phase. With that Sun trining it, there's this emphasis on taking action. There's also this inspiration to take action. There's this, it's the Sun in the South Node. There's this fatalism to it. And last week too, when we got to Sunday, we had Mercury squaring Neptune and Mercury conjoining the South Node. And what I love about this transit is it's Mercury, right? Mercury wants the details. Mercury just needs to read the instructions. Mercury needs to read over the fine print. Mercury wants to be able to communicate clearly what it's feeling. But while Mercury's in detriment, Mercury in Sagittarius just has to, be able to kind of get the gist. Mercury in Sagittarius is kind of like speaking in metaphors or speaking in images and kind of having to, pick up what someone's putting down. But with Mercury on the South Node, well, I should also say, what I want to say was with Mercury squaring Neptune, there's this confusion. It's kind of like you're at a concert and your friend yells something to you and you're like, well, I didn't really hear that, but I'm going to pretend like I did hear that. And with Mercury in Sag squaring Neptune, there's this still carrying the conversation on, even if you're not really sure what was being said. And I think with Mercury and Sag, you can't get all the details. You kind of just have to pick up what's getting put down. Even if, you're not really sure what that is, you kind of just have to go with the flow so you don't look dumb or so that you don't mess up something, right? Like those weird social norms that we all have. But with Mercury squaring Neptune too, there is some confusion. And I think what that is, like Mercury and Sag is trying to find all the answers. Mercury and Sag is looking for all of the answers. Mercury and Sag is exploring the meaning of those answers. But with it squaring Neptune, you're not going to get that clarity. It's just not there. And on Sunday, Mercury conjoins the South Node. So even though there's not this clarity of what exactly is supposed to happen from here on out, there is this decision that we have to make, though. There is this, okay, Mercury, on the South Node, there's this release, there's this surrendering to, we don't need to know the details. We don't need to know everything. We don't need to have a list for everything, right? Like sometimes we just kind of have to believe. Sometimes we kind of just have to take a leap of faith. But Mercury and Sag, Mercury on the South Node, making that square to Neptune is like, you have to let your mind be okay with that. Like our minds are all of us as humans, we're so programmed to like want to see everything and, look at everything a specific way. Mercury and Sag is like, hey, you're not going to see all the answers. Let it go. Enjoy what you can. You know what I mean? It's kind of like if you're watching a movie with someone and they've seen the movie and you haven't, you're not going to go, hey, what is that guy doing there? Or, what does that mean? Oh, who's this? You know what I mean? Like just fucking shut up and watch the movie and you'll figure it out. And so, this is eclipse season too, where we start now to talk about this week, and I'm going to pull up the chart here. When we talk about this week, we're starting this week off with the solar eclipse in Sagittarius. So we have Sunday, we have that kind of moment of kind of surrendering thought, kind of just surrendering our ideas, just letting shit go almost in a sense. And then we get to Monday. And Monday, that's when we'll have, that's on Monday. We'll have the solar eclipse in Sagittarius. We'll have Mercury making its trine to Mars. We'll have Venus sextiling Jupiter and Saturn right before Jupiter and Saturn go into Aquarius, which is about to happen any fucking minute. And then the moon also ingresses into Capricorn that evening. So Monday is a very, I want to say, it's a very fatalistic day. This is a total solar eclipse, right? This is both the sun and the moon, the luminaries. They're on one spot. There's an emphasis, right? Like, this isn't like all stage lighting. This is spotlight. And the spotlight's focused on Sagittarius. Sagittarius, what do we believe? What do we have faith in? This is the South Node. What are we stepping away from? What are we now concluding as our past? What are we, and also too, you know, I talked about this on Twitter. The South Node is again about letting go, but Sagittarius being ruled by Jupiter is about our beliefs, about how we view things, our worldview. And there's this kind of surrendering to, like, you know, I don't view things this way anymore. You know, it was Diana Harper on Twitter. If you don't follow Diana Harper on Twitter, you should. Actually, let me go to the tweet right now because I just love it that much. She said, with the upcoming South Node solar eclipse in Sag, stop believing that you have to pretend to be who you aren't, pretend things are okay when they aren't, pretend you like what you don't, and pretend to care when you don't, and pretend your heart's sincerest wishes don't matter. And I love how much she used pretend there, because I think with the South Node, there's kind of like this acceptance, this realization of kind of like, you know, this is kind of how I see things. This is kind of how I'm viewing things now, and it's all becoming clear, and it's just going to be easier to step into it. So when we talk about Monday's that day where you see that pivot, where you see that shift over. As well on Monday, we are going to be having Mercury making this trine to Mars. So there's this influential conversation that Mercury is having with Mars, and Mercury is persuading Mars to take action. Mercury is in Sag. You know, Mercury can have its way with words. In Sagittarius, yes, it's a detriment, but Mercury and Sag, you know, when you have a planet in detriment, it forces that planet to overcome a lot of obstacles and usually end up becoming really good at what its main significations are because it doesn't have the resources or tools that it's used to. Kind of like how Tony Stark was able to create the Iron Man suit when he was like held hostage in a cave. But with Mercury trining Mars, there's this, you know, kind of like, all right, we could dream big, we could see it, let's move forward with it. Venus is sextiling. Venus is at the last degrees of Scorpio here too. So there's this intensity to there's this intensity when it comes to value. There's this intensity when it comes to reward or treasure and what's worth something, what feels good. And Venus is in Scorpio, right? Like, we're trying to make that feel good last as long as possible. It's the only thing that we've got. And it's Venus sextiling Jupiter and Saturn. There's this, what our desires are and how we're handling them are being supported by this new, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about Jupiter and Saturn with the conjunction next week, we still got a lot to talk about. This is a special, by the way. I don't think I've even mentioned that. This is going to be a long episode. But with Venus sextiling Jupiter and Saturn, there's this okay, things are kind of looking better. This is the benefics making a harmonious aspect, and they're both about to go. Venus is about to leave her detriment, and Jupiter is about to leave its fall. These planets are excited, and Venus sextiling Jupiter is kind of like, it's like when you and your coworker just finish a crazy shift. Like if you ever worked retail and you work Black Friday, and you and your coworkers look at each other afterwards like, God damn, that was crazy. And we're so excited today's done. So Venus at those last degrees of Scorpio too, there's going to be this kind of, I don't know, this bittersweet feeling of moving forward. It is very bittersweet, but it's very hopeful. It's like you're at, the way I would describe it, an image I can give you guys would be like being at the bottom of some place, but looking up and seeing light increase. Yeah, this is kind of a weird point that we're in. It's not our best point, but things are looking up from here. It's not in our face. The positive isn't necessarily in front of us at this moment, but we know it's coming. And the moon moves into Capricorn later on Monday evening. So it's like, And by the way, this is the last moon in Capricorn transit with both Saturn and Jupiter in Capricorn. So as the moon goes from Sag, it gets eclipsed, right? This is an eclipse. This is your attention's being taken away. You are being focused on this area in your life, almost sometimes dramatically too. Eclipses. And think back to June. What started in June? What was illuminated in June for you when we had that lunar eclipse in Sagittarius? And what is coming to, I guess, what are you coming to terms with now since then? And that's a long time ago. That's May and June. Think about what we have all been through collectively. I mean, I was just talking to a friend, and it's almost like traumatizing remembering being here in like Southern California or just anywhere on the West Coast, like all of the fires that we had, even just in September. Like it was literally red and smoky outside. That was this year. Plus this year, we also had the Black Lives Matter protest. Plus we had Kobe die. And it's just like, plus COVID and everything. Plus it's just like, there was so much that's happened. There's so much that's happened, especially since May and June. And I would ask yourselves what was illuminated then, and because of what was illuminated then, what are you now changing in your life because of that moment? That's where you're really seeing this kind of get transferred to. And the moon will go into Capricorn right after that. Last moon in Capricorn transit, this is where it's time to get serious. It's like we make these decisions, we have these realizations, boom, it's time to get to work. It's time to, when you have to quit your job, it's not an easy task. It's an emotional task. I mean, like, I remember when I had to quit the Hard Rock, because I used to work the Hard Rock of the Strip, and that was like the first time I ever had like a family. Like, I had like a group of friends that actually like didn't treat me like shit, and that like actually loved me, and like my coworkers, like my family. And it was really hard quitting that job. But the moon in Capricorn is kind of like that time where it's like you have to do something that's emotional, but you got to accept the emotions out of it. You got to make those cold-hearted decisions almost. It's that moon in Capricorn feeling. It makes it easier. It supports us doing that, but it is a little blocked off. We get to the 15th, and I know I don't have any of the words for you guys. This is, kind of just last minute thing I'm doing. These eclipses are happening in my first house. This eclipse is happening like on my ascendant, so I'm very like drained lately. But I'm sure you guys get it. Anyway, we moved to Tuesday. And that's when Venus enters Sagittarius. Now, this is, in my opinion, going to be one of the funnest things. Now, that's also me just being biased because I have a ton of fire and air in my chart, and I'm a Sag rising. But as Venus goes into Sag, where Venus, you got to remember, reward, value, pleasure. She was in detriment. Getting what she wanted was kind of hard. It was like definitely a struggle, and what she did get wasn't exactly the thing that she really wanted. With Venus and Sag, Venus and Sag wants freedoms. Venus and Sag wants exploration. Venus and Sag wants fun. Venus and Sag wants, to believe. Venus and Sag wants to explore. Like, I think with the planet of pleasure and rewards and value going into the sign that's not Scorpio, that's not all inky and gunky, that's more fun and uplifting, I think that's really going to change the mood. And we're also talking about, we had Venus and Libra squaring Saturn and Jupiter. Do you remember this was like a month ago, 2 months ago, when Venus was in Libra and it was squaring Jupiter and Saturn and it was opposite Mars? And then Venus entered detriment, where it then went opposite Uranus, and then it was in detriment, right? Like we had a bunch of problems with it. Venus is now finally getting some support. Venus is still sextiling Jupiter and Saturn, but now it's not in detriment. It's going to be trining Mars. It's not being afflicted by anything. It'll eventually get a square to Neptune, but, that can be fun. That's not all the way bad. So I think with Venus going to Sag, things just like lighten up. And I think we all really need that right now. Like, holiday season on top of everything. Like, things are just so heavy. Things are so dark. And it's so funny too, just like, I don't know, it's the vibe of everything is it's just so intense. Everything's so intense right now. Everything's so heavy too, I would say. And I think as Venus goes into Sag, things will lighten up. We then go into, that's really the only thing that's going on Wednesday. Sorry, I had to take my jacket off. It was getting a little hot there. Anyway, on Wednesday, the next day, this is when we're going to be having the moon make a square to Mars, as the moon's in Capricorn. And this is also going to be the moon's last conjunction with Saturn and Jupiter before the moon moves into Aquarius. So, Typically, I would say this is more difficult, but this sounds really, in my opinion, really strong, really beneficial. The moon is first going to make a square to Mars. So there is this irritation, like the moon in Capricorn, wants things to go by a plan. The moon in Capricorn wants everything to work in its system that it's created. But with the moon squaring Mars, not everything goes according to plan, and not everything, the way that you have it planned or the way that you want it to go, the way that you were expecting it to go, it's not really going to go that way. And I don't think it's going to be bad. There's just maybe something a little irritating, maybe something a little bit frustrating about how you kind of have to handle things. But the moon is also applying to Jupiter right after it conjoins, right after it squares Mars. It's going to start applying to Jupiter, where there's this increase and there's this almost optimism towards, again, what we're building. Like, you got to think the moon's heading towards Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is literally, again, Jupiter and Saturn are at the same degree at this point. Like, I can't emphasize enough. We're in the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction now. Yes, it doesn't technically happen until next week, but we're in it now. Like, they're 1 degree within each other. They're technically 30 minutes from each other. So essentially, if you go out in the sky right now, they're pretty fucking close. So, and you should watch it because, also a lot of news channels and a lot of social media people have been like blowing this up, but you should definitely go watch it. It's a once in a lifetime type of event. But as the moon, it starts applying to Jupiter and makes that conjunction with Jupiter and Saturn, there's this okay, this is what we're coming to terms to. This is what I'm starting to initiate. This is what I'm wanting to begin. This is what also, but with beginnings, there's endings, right? Like, I like to emphasize, with beginnings, there's endings. There's no just 1 minute you're going this way, all of a sudden things go this way. There's a transitionary phase. And I think with the moon conjoining Jupiter and Saturn, there's this excitement of things to end and this anticipation and almost anxiety of things that are going to begin. It's going to be kind of a heavy, weird day. Well, yeah, I would say it's going to be kind of a heavy, weird day on Wednesday. It's not looking horrible, but it's just kind of nerve-wracking. The moon's also going to be on Pluto, too. But then we get to Thursday, and both the moon and Saturn enter Aquarius. The moon technically enters Aquarius early that morning. But there's a lot to talk about. You guys should already know. You should be watching my Saturn in Aquarius video that I did to know more about how Saturn in Aquarius is going to be affecting your chart. But Saturn, rules, discipline, limitation, boundaries, authority. It's going into Aquarius. Remember, sorry, I got something in my eye. This isn't our first rodeo of Saturn in Aquarius. Saturn originally went into Aquarius in March and April, May, and June. So what was going on for you during those months? Again, a lot of right now is us reflecting back to what May and June really were. What was going on then is kind of coming up more now. And so when you talk about Saturn and Aquarius, what boundaries were being in place? Aquarius is, bigger groups of people. Social distancing was enforced. And we can go, I don't even want to go into how the COVID thing gets brought up with all of this, but on a personal level, what were you applying yourself to? What were the new constraints and what were the new rules that you were abiding under? Saturn represents, here's a new challenge. Saturn says, here's a new obstacle. Saturn says, here's a new set of rules to play with. And as Saturn was in Aquarius, what rules changed for you? Where did you have to kind of, become more disciplined and serious? Because we're right back at it again. Like, that was just a little test. That was just a scrimmage. This is the actual game. And the moon goes into Aquarius. And I think it's so interesting that the moon literally conjoins Saturn and then bam, they both go into Aquarius. There's this, I think for one with the moon going to Aquarius, the moon there, the moon is a light, right? The moon's coming off an eclipse. The moon is gaining in light. So the moon is literally starting to, and it's also starting to make that first sextile to the sun zodiacally. So the moon's literally gaining in light here. Things are starting to become more clear in this area of what the new is supposed to look like by the time we get into Thursday. And there's this openness of like, okay, this is the new thing. How do we continue that? How do we work with that? How do we work within the parameters and with the obligations and the rules that we have? That's all that Saturn and Aquarius stuff. And Thursday's just the beginning. Thursday's not like, oh, here we are, new world. Thursday, it's like, when you buy a house, there's like 3 different phases where you first they accept your offer, and then it's like, then boom, you get approved for like, or first it's like you get approved for the mortgage, then boom, you find the house that you want, and then they finally accept your offer, and then it finally closes escrow, and then you finally get the keys, or then it passes inspection. Like there's so many different places to celebrate. Like Saturn going into Aquarius is like, if we're buying a house right now, we picked out the house, it's already got inspected, and now, we're in escrow. Now we're just in that bubble period where we're waiting for things to kind of like, okay, escrow, usually things go good. Sometimes it can kind of go bad, but we're kind of just in that purgatory phase where you don't know what's going to happen. And at any moment they could say you do or don't get the house. Because then we go into Friday. Because again, that's Saturn in Aquarius. We're not going to close escrow, and we're not going to really get the keys to the house until we get to like next week. But the snowball effect is turning at this point. The moon then on Friday makes a sextile to Mars, and that's really the only thing going on Friday. That's really the only thing going on Friday. And with the moon in Aquarius, I feel like with Saturn here, there's this ability to like see things kind of more clearly and be a little bit more open-minded with how things work. And as that sextiles Mars and Aries goes, yeah, like, Mars and Aries has been dealing with Saturn and Capricorn for the past, like, ever. So now that Mars is getting some support from this Aquarius perspective, it's like, oh, I do see how I can maybe finagle things or do things maybe a little bit different in order to get what I kind of want done. And I think the moon in Aquarius is, again, we're starting to kind of see how we can kind of connect the dots a little bit better. We're kind of seeing the space in which we can maneuver. It's the same idea where if you were to stand face to face with a line of people and they were all lined up, like let's say there was 1,000 of me and there was a single file line behind me, but if you were to stand right in front of me, you would think that all these people were really close. But if you took an aerial perspective and went up, well, we could be all 10 feet apart. You know what I mean? It's all about perspective. And I think this moon in Aquarius just offers that different perspective, that bigger perspective. And you're able to kind of see the room in which you can maneuver in. So, and again, this is something that we're going to deal with again in like February. But in this time frame, well, also January and February, but all these days are just going to kind of blur together. This is like when I say Friday, the moon is going to sextile Mars. Basically, we're still also dealing with Saturn just moving into Aquarius and Jupiter moving into Aquarius and everything else. So, like, this is very light. This is diet astrology. But this whole week is so big that, like, you don't want to get too lost in the details. Like, there's so much bigger shit going on that this almost doesn't even matter. But then we get to Saturday. And this is where everything kind of changes, in my opinion. Saturday is the day. I mean, if you watch like the astrology podcast, they talked about like this is, the election day. Saturday is awesome. This is, in my opinion, this is the good day. The moon first moves into Pisces, so it's now in a sign of a benefic. It's not being ruled by Saturn. It's being ruled by Jupiter. The moon, again, emotions are lighting up what we don't always see. The moon going into Pisces is we have this free space to express and to feel things. The moon in Pisces, it's kind of like when they call it safe spaces. It's like, well, it's kind of awkward that like there's a space to do this in, but it's also kind of nice that you have a space to do that in. And like the moon in Pisces is just illuminating, how we need to integrate. It's illuminating how we need to bring things kind of together and to kind of come to an agreement somewhere. Now the moon is also going to be squaring Venus. So there's this Venus and Sag like excitement of wanting to go and wanting to explore. And the moon in Pisces is like, I want to do that too, but I kind of want to stay around here. Let's feel this out real quick. And the moon squaring Venus isn't bad, but there is, a little bit of disagreement between your wants and like your emotions. Nothing horrible. It actually looks pretty good. But also the moon will sextile Uranus too. So there's this kind of neurotic charge to it, like this excitement. I think there's a lot of excitement with this transit. But then also Jupiter moves into Aquarius. Again, like here we are. I mean, in my opinion, here we are. We're really going to see it on the Saturn when they conjoin. But here we are. Jupiter's in Aquarius now. We had, and this is the big thing you guys got to remember. We had Saturn in Aquarius this spring. We didn't get Jupiter in Aquarius this spring. So this is, I mean, we've already got a little bit of a taste of Jupiter in Aquarius. I mean, we've already got a taste of Saturn in Aquarius, but we haven't tried Jupiter. We haven't had a cup of Jupiter in Aquarius since 2009. So this is really where you're going to see all of the new stuff get introduced. This is where you're really going to see also, now that, I mean, Saturn going to Aquarius is like, yeah, this is what's going on. Jupiter is like bringing the life of the party, though. It's like, I feel like Saturn in Aquarius is like when cops show up to the party and then everyone's like, oh no. And then Jupiter enters and the cops are actually all strippers instead of like actual cops. And then the party gets even crazier. Like that's the way I would explain that. But as Jupiter goes into Aquarius, this is where, I mean, just as Jupiter also, the greater benefic, leaving its sign of depression. Like, sure, it's still in a Saturn-ruled sign and on top of Saturn, exactly, but holy fuck, the alleviation that Jupiter is going to get moving out of Aquarius. We're all going to feel it. And so there's this expansion of opportunities. There's this expansion of ideas or how we can work things, how we can actually do things. Like, I mean, this is an all-encompassing transit, right? So you want to just make sure you know where Aquarius is at in your chart. But with Jupiter now moving, this is where things get excited. Now, this is where it gets crazy, though. This is also the Mercury-Sun conjunction. The Mercury-Sun cazimi. So, on top of all of this, you know, the moon's in Pisces, we're feeling things out, we're kind of, you know, excited, but we're also kind of like, oh shit, where is this going? Because it's a lot of anticipation, it's a lot of fun. And then Jupiter's on top. Jupiter's in a whole new sign. We're in a whole new world. It's on top of Saturn. There's this new, greater way of looking at things, but also this is Jupiter on top of Saturn. This is taking responsibility for our beliefs. This is taking a lot of responsibility and obligation and just maturity of our worldview, our beliefs, and what we have faith in. Like that's Jupiter on top of Saturn. But on this Mercury cazimi that we're also having on the same day, this is like, you know, the trifecta of like, I mean, if you want to talk about a light bulb moment, it's going to be on Saturday where things just click, where things just come together, where you just fucking get it. That's going to be on Saturday. Mercury conjoining the sun. And two, this is the galactic center, the 28 degrees Sagittarius. I mean, like, I feel a little biased when I talk about the galactic center because my ascendant's on the galactic center, so I don't want to sound too crazy cool, but I like talking about the galactic center in the sense of there's these deeper human truths that we seem to kind of like get from the galactic center. There's this like this holistic understanding, right? There's this like things just kind of fucking click a little bit easier. There's a certain perspective that makes more sense. And with this cazimi, this is ideas, our mindset clicking. It's all coming together. And this is Sagittarius. This is seeing the vision. This is seeing the long term. This is understanding where things are going. This is like, and this is also ruled by Jupiter. And now Jupiter's in Aquarius on Saturn. Like, this is the day where we really see things completely differently. And it sounds so weird. Like, you know, I talked about when I talked about last year in the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, everything was kind of, you know, dissipating. Everything was crumbling. We're finally at this spot now where, you know, I don't want to say, I don't like the term reconstruction, but I do like the term, a remodel or under new management is a good way to look at it. And so Saturday is just, I mean, Saturday, like, man, call your loved ones, celebrate, you know, like have a good time, but also on Saturday, get clear on Saturday. Like that's the biggest, that's something I'm going to do, but I mean, like, this is also like super affecting my chart. So like, I don't really got a choice in all of it. We get to Sunday and, here, let me back this up too, so we could kind of look at how things were. So, let's see what happens again. So that's Saturday, and then bam, we get to Sunday, and that's when Mercury enters Capricorn, and the moon will conjoin Neptune. So, couple things. The moon conjoining Neptune, again, our emotions and, you know, the more internal things that are getting illuminated. On top of Neptune is there's this saturation of color. There's this, I always like to say, like, Neptune kind of like is like a deep fried meme. Like, it's just, everything's very saturated. Everything's very colorful. Everything's very like diluted too. And so the moon on top of Neptune is very like feeling a lot of things all at once, but knowing that all of these feelings are both very fun, but also very confusing. And so I think the moon conjoining Neptune is, be open to change. Like the moon, again, this is Jupiter ruled, so we're talking about integration here. We're talking about the mixture of things and how we have to blend it all together. I talk a lot about how, pretty sure I talked about this in one of my year ahead horoscopes. I don't remember. But Virgo is like, I maybe even talked about this on my last, I talked about this not that long ago, so sorry if I sound like a broken record, but Virgo being like, all of the things, like being a musician that knows their scales, they know their chords, they know music theory, they know their fifths, they know all of that stuff, right? Pisces is, well, that musician, you don't write music. Well, I mean, I don't want to say write music. When you jam, right? When you're just trying to play something, you don't go, oh, well, I know this, and that. You just kind of play it, right? Like it just kind of just happens, right? Like you kind of have an idea and then it kind of just flows depending on how much. It's the integration, it's the mixture of all of that knowledge. And so moon on Pisces on Sunday is so much like, all right, how do we mix this all together? How does this kind of make sense? And Mercury's going into Capricorn. I think this is great. I think Mercury in Capricorn is like, we're able to get a plan laid out. We're able to kind of speak things a little bit easier. Mercury in Sag is so, like if the microphone is the point, Mercury in Sag kind of does this, or it goes around and, goes around all around the point, or maybe it wants to avoid it and it looks at another thing, or it distracts you from something else. As Mercury goes into Capricorn, this is like corporate lingo. Like, let's use words that mean things, and because it's underneath this pretext, like, things just flow in a different way. And I think with Mercury and Capricorn too, Mercury was in Sagittarius on the South Node. So there was this like real big change in our rational minds of the way that we were thinking. With Mercury and Capricorn, things become a lot more like constructive. It's easier to put ideas and plans together. And this is Capricorn. It's a cardinal sign. It's about initiating. It's about beginning. So Mercury is trying to see where things can go. Look at how things can be initiated. Look how things can be started. And I mean, that leads us into next week. And look at this. Jupiter and Saturn, 5 minutes at this point on Sunday. And then we go to next week. Whoops. Let me backtrack that there so you guys can actually see it. Then we go to next week. Look at that. Jupiter's on the other side of Saturn. I'll do that again for you so you can actually see it better. Bam. The old switcheroo. We have the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction next week, literally starting Monday off. And so, I mean, we're off to the races at that point. I want to know what's going to happen in the news. I think you're going to see. I mean, we saw it when Mars and Saturn conjoined in Aquarius was the day lockdown started. And before that, it was all this buildup. We weren't sure what was going to happen. And now Jupiter and Saturn have been building up. We're like, we're not sure what's going to happen. And now Jupiter and Saturn is going to conjoin, and then something's going to happen. So we'll see what it's going to be. But then next week, we also have the winter solstice. The sun goes into Capricorn. Mars squares Pluto, and the sun trines Uranus. Really, it's all about the start of next week. And then after that, it really dies down. But it's really this week. I kind of missed last week's horoscope because, a lot of it was just stuff on the South Node. It was just coming to terms with things, surrendering, getting the picture. And now this is the kind of setting the stage of events where shit's going to kind of happen and things start going a different way. So I think that's really exciting, but I do want to kind of close this out with talking about this year. There's not a lot to talk about. This year is, why I want to close this out in this way is when you look back, for one, I'm a huge geopolitics, history, economics nerd. Like that's all I do in my free time is study that stuff. When you talk about historically speaking, we have got it. I mean, especially my generation, I'm a Gen Z, like we've had it so good for so long since besides 9/11, which isn't even a big deal anymore because of how, over 200,000 people have died of fucking COVID. It's a kind of a way bigger number. We haven't had anything quite this crazy in a long time. And for all of us, even you old boomers that watch my show, and us young kids, this is our first crisis. You know what I mean? I was thinking a lot about my grandpa. My grandpa was part of the greatest generation. He was in he was born like I think 20s or 30s, and he ended up being a part of that area, right, where you grow up in, like, my grandparents are from like the Dust Bowl in Oklahoma and Arkansas. And you grow up in that environment, and how that shapes your worldview, and how we grew up in this environment where everything's, you know, or at least since like at least the 80s, everything's been pretty fucking chill for the most part. We had 9/11, but nothing super bad. And I mean, in the 2008, I could go on of all the little tiny bad things, but like this was world shocking. And this was like, I mean, even in the astrology, this was just crazy. Like, I mean, this was a lot to handle. And I think we really need to take a step back and go, okay, we all can be, this is just like dating a shitty ex or a shitty person. You can be traumatized from this relationship and might be scared of moving forward because of what can happen. There are a lot of new things that are going to be happening, but not every person that you date is going to be like the shitty ex that is 2020. You know, a lot of people say that this was a good year for them. And I think this was a really good year. This is a really good year for me too. I think though, the way that we got to those good things were not in a really fun way. It was in a really like life-changing, having to face a lot of shit way. And those were really good changes. And that's why I'm trying to bring this up is when we want to make positive changes, we're not going to have to go through like life-altering events like we just did. It's going to be a little bit easier to make positive changes in your life and to have good things. Like good things are going to come through good ways starting from here on out, not just, you know, through these intense ways. And that's not, you know, forever. What I'm trying to get, what the point I'm trying to make though is 2020 was a very intense year. It's not like that moving forward. Things do get, I mean, you're going to watch too in the 2021 horoscopes that I'm going to put out eventually, probably next week though. I talk a lot about how there's just, you know, a lot of ups and downs of next year. 2022 looks great, but there's a lot of ups and downs of next year, just like any other year. But wow, will it be a lot easier than what this was. And I also want to say too, why I want to close out with this is just reflect on what did you actually learn. Like this is one of those years where like, if you're not taking what you got out of this year with you forward and using that, like you're wasting your time. Yeah, like I don't know. This was a pretty crazy year. And I think, you should definitely sit with yourself, be proud of yourself that you made it. Congratulations. You survived, 2020. But also you should take what you went through very seriously, and you should not just let it be, you're like, oh yeah, 2020 was crazy, but then I just went back to what I was doing right before. Like, you know, this isn't a big time to, change your life and do everything great. But like, this is definitely like probably one of the easiest times to get rid of shit that no longer serves you anymore. Get rid of shit and change shit that is old. Again, I talked about this at the end of last year. I talked about 2020 being that year of like, whatever you don't want to bring into the next 10 years, leave it behind this year. And that's kind of like what I feel like this week is really about. Like this is that, all right, it's all at the donation center. It's all going behind. This is what moving forward looks like. So I guess I'll stop rambling. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here, liking, sharing, commenting, subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys. Your 2021 horoscopes will be out eventually soon. I know I'm bad. But thank you guys anyway, and I'll be seeing you guys next week.